Hello and welcome. You're tuned into the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. We have got a brand new Theater of the Mind coming up a little bit later on in today's show, and it's neat. It's a bookend story, if you would. Last week, we heard from Jay Giuliano, the lead singer, or one of the lead singers of Slamabama, which is a fantastic group. If you haven't had a chance to hear him, go check him out. And today, his wife, Rosanna Giuliano, shares a couple of stories with us. Very touching, really interesting, and I think they're going to tie in very well with today's topics. Joining us all the way from the Philippines, Cyrus Kirkpatrick. He is a metaphysical author, travel writer, truth seeker, and he's got 3 books. A brand new book is going to be coming out here, I think, this week. But right now he's got Understanding Life After Death, an exploration of what awaits you, me, and everyone we've ever known. He also has a book out there, co-authored, Awakened by Death, Stories of Transformation, and as I mentioned, coming out later this week, The Afterlife and Beyond, an examination of life after death by an out-of-body explorer. Cyrus, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hey, it's great to be here.
All right, so I'm sensing a theme. You have an interest in the afterlife.
Yes, it would appear so, wouldn't it?
You've been a traveler. You've been interested in this. Is part of your travels learning how different cultures perceive life after death?
Yes, that's something that I got into more recently as I began talking to people in different countries about these subjects, and I learned a lot about that in terms of cultures in the Middle East as well as Indonesia, and a lot of surprising epiphanies about that. So it's interesting you bring that up.
Do you run into many different cultures that just have absolutely no belief that there's something that happens once our light finally goes out?
The only cultures that are this way are cultures that were they had a bit of enforced atheism, I suppose you could say, during the Soviet era. Because I think any culture that has an old kind of, shall we say, anthropological background is going to have awareness about this other side of life. But when something comes along, like let's say communist China or communist Russia, and they say, well, you know what, it's against the law if you have supernatural beliefs, then that does a pretty effective job of stamping those things out. So if you go to some places like in East Europe, you'll find perhaps a majority atheist population who will not, well, rather, in addition to not believing in God, they will also reject ideas of a supernatural style. And I've seen that in the Czech Republic and also Bosnia, Romania. I've definitely seen a lot of influence on that level. But there's still, even in those countries, if you go out to the old country, then there are still people who carry on the traditions and beliefs from, I suppose, an era that predates the period of like Soviet or Yugoslavian occupation.
Even in the cultures that don't really seem to subscribe to a theory on the afterlife, do they still have near-death experiences that kind of shake that paradigm for them? Or are you finding that people that don't believe, when they have a near-death experience, nothing occurs for them?
So certainly the near-death experience will occur even if somebody is not a quote-unquote believer. And this is something that we've seen in a lot of cases. If you research NDEs, you have people like George Rodonia, who was actually an atheist from the Soviet Union, who I believe was assassinated by the KGB. And he had one of the most profound NDEs that researchers have found, because he was basically like 48 hours. And if I recall the story correctly, he came back to life on the autopsy table in a morgue. And then he had one of the most profound NDEs. And he was a lifelong atheist, subscribing to the hardline Soviet model of belief, which is not accepting anything that's supernatural. So even in those countries, yes, people will have NDEs, and the NDEs typically shape most cultures' ideas about the other side because they happen to everybody and they've always happened. So definitely people who are atheists will still have experiences like that. And even, well, I suppose the one caveat is that in a culture that's not open to these types of things, people will be more inclined not to share their NDEs. So they might keep it secret. They might not tell friends and family. But a culture that's open, then it's not such a big deal.
Did you personally have a near-death experience or somebody in your life touched by that?
I've not personally had an NDE. So a little bit about me is that what I do is I do out-of-body experiences. And this really began in 2014. So this became my way of exploring directly all of the supernatural ideas, probably many of the ideas that you've talked about on your show, to be able to experience that directly. But before then, I had already been writing about and researching the afterlife since I was a boy. So I already had many, many, many years of experience of researching these topics. But then I kind of decided in 2014 I was going to teach myself how to go out of body and begin having direct experiences with the beyond. And that's what led me to my first book, which is Understanding Life After Death, because I had a solid year or so of having these very profound experiences. But fortunately,
well, Cyrus, explain that to me then. I guess I wasn't aware that just learning out-of-body experiences or, astral travel, whatever you want to call it, can elevate you to the same levels as death. I always kind of thought these would be like two different separate worlds. The kind of the consciousness of OBEs, out-of-body experiences, and then the different depths of where we go after we die would be something I would have assumed we'd be able to strike up in near-death experiences. What led you to believe that you could bridge that and make it there without being in a position of near-death yourself?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of similarities between these two things. So if you have an out-of-body experience, in some cases you can be, literally outside of your body. You can float up, or you can literally walk out of your body and go across the room. And if you read about NDEs, that's also the first thing that happens, is that they go out of their body. They're above their body, or they're walking around, or they're floating. The NDE is a more in-depth experience. And I think basically, well, let me just back up a little bit. So with an out-of-body experience, or rather astral travel, you can most definitely be in the same types of environments that people have in NDEs, right? So if somebody has an NDE and they say that they're in a beautiful temple and there's light and there's teachers and wise people, well, during some astral experiences, you could be in the same type of environment. And I've certainly been in those environments as well, which are very reminiscent of many NDEs. So when it comes to the actual death experience, there are differences between the NDEs and OBEs. NDEs tend to be a lot more transcendental, almost like taking a shot of like DMT or something, because it's like your mind expands very quickly to what people call like your higher self. People see the light and people feel that connection to the universe, and a lot of profound experiences from there. But if you read about NDEs, you'll notice that a lot of times it begins that way, and then it kind of sinks back down into an astral level. So somebody will maybe encounter God, have those experiences, and then they'll say, then I was in a city, I was in a temple, I was surrounded by loved ones, friends, and family. And I won't deny that NDEs, I think they're more connected to that side because your physical body is out. Whereas with an out-of-body experience, your physical body is not completely out, and you may have some conscious perception of your body, like laying on the bed still. Maybe it's sleeping or whatnot. So you're not fully there. And incidentally, the first good out-of-body experience I had, where I connected to somebody who was living on that side, like a teacher, they told me, hey, if you're exploring this, just keep one thing in mind, is that when you go out of body, you're never going to be fully, completely here with us. So don't let that perception taint your idea about what your experiences are. It's not until you die that you'll be 100% physically here. And so I've always kept that in mind.
So in essence, are you kind of a ghost to them then, since you're not fully there, not fully realized?
The answer is yes. So that's what, when we talk about ghosts, what we are really talking about is interaction between two dimensions and the interference that occurs. So when I think of a ghost, I think of, well, this is somebody that exists on a parallel dimension, and this person is just bleeding through into ours a little bit. So if you ever saw the film The Others with Nicole Kidman, that's
right.
a very good film to kind of illustrate that. And so to them, our side, we are more like the ghosts. But unlike here, like on that side, we can actually pop up, like if somebody's dreaming or projecting, and walk around and interact with people. And, unlike here where we just sometimes catch a quick glimpse of something or a materialization of something in an old house or, something along those lines, to them, we may pop up and actually talk to them and interact with them, but we're not really fully there. And sometimes people, when we dream, we can also appear on that side, but to us, it's like a dream. But to them, it's like a sleepwalker. So it's literally somebody dreaming from this side who is a bit incoherent and mumbling to themselves or whatnot. So, that's a good observation that there is a contrast between that. So it's like we experience ghosts here, but if you go to any other dimensional realm, then ghosts to them will be anybody else in any other dimension that's off limits, off access, if that makes sense.
Are they aware that they were once living here in this dimension once they've crossed over, or to them, is it just a reboot? Are they living a life there and they're seeing ghosts? They're seeing us pop in and out. How do you explain that?
Yeah, in my experience, I think most are aware because that's been my focus of like being, having these experiences, because I notice there's a lot of people who do out-of-body travel, but they're kind of wishy-washy about it. So they report these experiences, but they don't like interact with people. They don't do like scientific research. They just talk about this thing that happened to them, and then that's it. Like they don't want to explore too much more deeply. So I've made it a point to attempt to interview and talk to people on that side. And I've even done almost like what we call a focus group. So I would, literally get people together and ask, so do you have memory of when you were alive on Earth? And I've come to find like maybe 70 or 80% of people say yes. And then like 20, 30% say they don't really have much memory about that, or to them it was like a weird experience or like almost like a strange dream, living on this side. So most people, I think that, they have consciousness about having existed here, but almost like they want to put it behind them because it was a strange and difficult experience. And then for them, that's their life now. And so, it can be quite a bit different in this life, but typically in ways that are for the better. So, when they think back to here, it's not like the most pleasant memory.
What is it like for them then, having people on this side mourning them, crying out for them, seeking counsel from mediums and psychics to try to communicate with them using, Ouija boards? Are they constantly just flooded by the eternal internet squelching noise over there from all of us still crying out?
It is a bit like the internet. So like there's a lot of things that are different on like, the other side, so to speak, and we can learn about this from, hundreds of years of esoteric literature. But, among them is a rapid telepathic power. So if someone's grieving on this side, it's kind of like a Facebook message pops up, and then they feel it, they hear it, and then they, have an option sort of to respond to it. And also, I think mental mediums, my personal theory is that they connect kind of to their consciousness. So they may not even be aware if there's a mental medium that's tapping into them. So I've always wondered, like, how can a medium just like automatically say, okay, now I'm communicating with Gandhi, and like how, maybe Gandhi is busy or is in some higher realm and doesn't have time. So how do mediums allegedly do this? I think they just tap into that consciousness real quick. But to answer your question about if it is difficult for them, the answer I think is yes. I think especially if somebody recently crosses over, then they feel all that grief and all those issues. And I think it's enormously painful. And they do typically try to find ways to make contact. But also, I think sometimes, especially when people don't get any signs from their loved ones, It may mean that they just, they don't have themselves the emotional capability to try to make contact and do all that when so many people are grieving. Like, I think sometimes they just try to block it out and live their new experiences and focus on that. So
they grieve on the other side as well.
I would say yes, but my feeling is that it's a different kind of grief, because as weird as it sounds, my conclusion or theory about this is that on that side, they still interact with us because we kind of pop in there while we are dreaming, or we may have like parallel lives on that side that we don't have memory about. So they may still be interacting with us and being able to see us and talk to us. But then they also recognize that when we disappear from that side, we're back here, typically with no memory. And then we are ourselves again grieving. So they don't have to miss us so badly, but then they recognize that like a part of us is completely disconnected and very upset and very sad. And that's the part that that upsets them. So they're grieving because we're grieving. If we're not grieving, they're not going to feel upset.
Is it hard to straddle both worlds as an out-of-body explorer, visiting that realm, getting a sense of that realm, speaking to the people that are over there, and then coming back to this existence? Does it ever become cumbersome to you?
It does a little bit, in the sense that, well, in particular, I was having a lot of OBEs in like 2014, 2015, 2016. But starting like in 2017, I began to slow down because sometimes I just can't really handle it or deal with it. Sometimes, like, for instance, I have an OBE when I'm going to sleep. Sometimes I don't want to because I just want to sleep. And I don't know what kind of weird experience I'm going to have. And, if I've had a long day working or whatnot, I don't necessarily want to have an astral experience. I don't necessarily want to have an out-of-body experience. And then when you have that desire not to do it, then the experience is kind of shut down because your subconscious takes over and it's going to keep that from happening. So I suppose at times it gets a little bit overwhelming, like back when I was in the swing of things and doing it all the time. And otherwise, typically having the experiences is a gift, and it's especially in the first couple of years. I think it made this life much more exciting and thrilling because I have this whole different perspective now. So I don't know if it's difficult to straddle both topics, but it can become a bit tiring.
Well, that's understandable. I just didn't know if dabbling in that realm would make you long to stay in that realm.
It's interesting. I can see that happening. I think some people have projection experiences in realms that are even higher than the realms I go to. Typically I'm in kind of what we call like the astral earth. So it's still kind of a physical and solid, gritty place. But some people go to like these much finer, more heavenly types of realms that people report during NDEs. And I think the people who have those experiences, they struggle with that issue, similar to people who have NDEs. Because, people who have NDEs, sometimes they all they want is to go back to that place because the emotions are much richer and, you have this kind of cosmic or universal bliss that people experience. And it's almost like they get a hit of that and then they don't want anything else but that. But for me personally, I typically stay in what some people call the astral level, and still a level that I see the majority of people who cross over kind of gravitating into. And so it's a place to have a lot of excellent experiences, but it's not like you have something happen to you where you never want to do anything else but that. And I think that happens sometimes to people who see those very pristine types of realms that are much more heavenly. And that just hasn't quite happened to me on that level so much. And maybe if it did, I would have issues with that.
Cyrus Kirkpatrick, our guest, what is it like to be in the astral realm? He's communicated with spirits that have died. Are there lost souls? Are there alien and otherworldly souls? Are there earth agents, whether you want to call them elementals or eternals, what all exists there, and are there dangers in making that journey? We'll find out more in just a few seconds. We're back with our guest, Cyrus Kirkpatrick, as we're talking about near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, and astral projection, travel. Can we connect with the other side through these forms of travel? What is it like when you make that connection? Aside from apparently coming upon the dead, do you come upon people that have no clue where they are? Lost souls, alien beings, eternals, elementals? What all exist in this realm?
It's kind of funny you mentioned that, because I'd say yes to all of the above, excitingly enough. So to give you a little bit of a perspective, like if I'm back home in Los Angeles and if I go out of body inside of my bedroom, immediately I'm on the astral level, even if it's in the same house. So the interiors of the house may change. There may be other people living in the house, but the geography roughly stays the same. So if I leave the house, I go into the neighborhood, it looks strikingly similar to this world if you just looked at it on a superficial level, because you'll have a neighborhood, you'll have houses, there's neighbors, I know who those neighbors are. So it's kind of like a copy, in a sense, of what you might see here. But then when you go deeper, you come to find that this world is a lot different from what we're used to. And you may find any of the archetypes that you just mentioned existing, whether it's elementals or all types of interesting souls and spirits and personalities that you would not necessarily, well, you wouldn't experience on this side. I can give one example about this that I talk about on one page in my book, The Afterlife and Beyond. I was in the astral side of Los Angeles, and there was this woman who was very beautiful, and she was also dressed almost a little bit corny, like a devil, but she was very, very beautiful, and she had some clear signs of some non-human elements to her, like her ears. I think she had I almost want to say she had hooves instead of feet. So kind of a little bit strange, right? And so some people told me, that woman over there, she's a succubus. And it's best to stay away from her, because basically what she does is she preys on the lack of willpower of weak men. And she enslaves men and feeds off their energy and things like that. And being a curious out-of-body explorer, I decided I would...
No. Boil it down. Being a man, you decided to give it a shot. It had nothing with being a curious out-of-body explorer, Cyrus.
Being a dude, I decided, look, I'm not a weak-willed man. Maybe I'll go talk to this girl and see what's going.
It's good to know that our ego is still intact in the astral plane, and we're still dumbasses, no matter where we are.
But that's part of life, but I think that the guys who got caught up with her and became her slaves are probably bigger dumbasses.
Right.
So
and you knew you could beat that. I understand.
So I went to talk to this woman, and then I decided, look, I'm just gonna play it cool, talk to her, get to know her, and figure out a little bit about who she is. And indeed, we struck up a conversation, and then she basically invited me back to her place. And don't get any crazy ideas about that. I mean, we were just hanging out.
Sure, yeah. So just good friends.
Also, I have my defenses up, because I know that this entity, this creature, really has a lot of tricks up its own sleeve. So right. I have to keep my defenses up as well as I can. So we began walking back through some neighborhood, and sometimes the scene, the environment changes a little bit. It's almost like teleportation happens a bit naturally. Okay, we're going back to this other place, and then naturally you just start teleporting back from the city block where you were into some new environment. This is one of those weird things that just kind of happens naturally when you're in a less physical environment. But anyway, so soon we're on a path, and I'm talking to her, and I'm asking her, so what are your abilities? What are you? And she basically describes herself as a non-human entity. And she, all along the path, she demonstrated some of her powers. And so she picked up frog, and it was like a frog in the bushes. And so I asked her, what are you doing? And so she picks up the frog, and she says, well, every soul that exists, even one so stupid as this frog, has a higher potential inside of it. And she said something she is able to do is unlock a little bit of that higher power that's inside of it. And so she picked up this frog, and the frog transformed itself into like this. The best way to describe it is like a fairy, like this kind of fluttering, flying creature, and it looked female in appearance. And so she said, as you can see, I was able to unmask the real soul that is hidden behind this little piece of consciousness called a frog. And so, we looked at the fairy type creature together, and then the fairy, when she put it back down, turned back into a frog again. So it once her influence was over, it reverted back to its old form. So I thought that was very interesting, right? So, so she showed me that, and we kept walking.
Okay.
And then
I'm not laughing at you, trust me, but I'm just thinking you're wondering, what am I going to turn into when you touch me? Come on, baby.
Yeah, who knows,
Right.
Yeah, for real. But anyway, so we keep walking, and we end up at basically this mansion, so it's a very beautiful mansion, and we walk inside, and then she has a friend who is also a succubus. And she has this, she has like raven black hair, whereas the one I was talking to, I believe she had like blonde hair. So I meet her friend, and basically at that point we play billiards together. We play pool in their house, and we're chatting a bit. So while I'm playing pool, I begin to feel my consciousness fading. This means that my experience is about to end. I'm trying to like hold on to the experience, but it's beginning to fade away. So as it begins to fade, I gain awareness of my body laying on the bed, sleeping, snoring. And soon the experience cuts off. I open my eyes, but here's the kicker. Soon after I open my eyes, I hear a voice that's crystal clear inside my room. And the voice says, Katara and JC. So these were their names. The blonde one I met, her name was JC, and her black-haired friend was named Katara. And she was able to manifest briefly into my room, in the physical environment, to be able to tell me their names so that I wouldn't forget them. And so that made it a very memorable experience, because it cut boundaries a little bit and became a supernatural event on this side.
So now, as a succubus, I mean, their kind of goal is to entice you into a sexual situation, and I'm sure drain you part of your energy. That just never came up. You guys stuck with billiards, or was that just a metaphor?
No metaphors. We played pool, and that's it. And I consider myself fairly adept at these types of things. I have encountered negative entities, kind of a demonic entity once. And I know the way the game works, so I'm never going to surrender my power to any entity, no matter what. So no matter how enticing these entities could be to me, I would have never fallen for any of their tricks. Not to sound immodest, but that's just the way it is with me. And I think that they could sense that. And so hopefully, or presumably, they saw me more as an equal or a peer, and not some weak-willed man that they could seduce into their clutches. So I would like to think of that as having made a friendship connection, and I could learn about them, and they wanted me to remember who they were. But at the same time, you also have to keep your defenses up. You can't be naive. So like I never encountered them again. But if I had, you still have to be defensive about these types of things when dealing with entities on that plane of existence.
What about otherworldly beings, like aliens, things like the mantis head people? There's been a lot of speculation that those are not really alien in nature, but they're coexisting in kind of an alternate reality or in a unseen reality that's taking place here. Does that vision open up to you when you enter the astral realm?
Well, I've never personally encountered them. However, I know many other people have, not just mantids, but gray aliens, and also the more beautiful, like Nordic extraterrestrials. I think a lot of these ETs exist naturally on this kind of second Earth, the astral Earth. They may even have set up shop on that side. And they may have bases, they may have ships, and they have a button on their ship that switches them to our side. And this could be why we see UFOs just materializing in out of nowhere sometimes, because they may be flying around that side, and then they may punch a button or use their thoughts and then teleport to our side. So I think it's more likely than not, most of these ET races, if not originating from that side, they have the ability to travel between these two realms. And I also have a kind of a pet theory that a lot of these experiences people have with ETs are happening on that side. You know, I don't think people so often have abduction experiences inside their physical bodies. I think that, you know, you could be laying next to somebody on a bed and they could be getting abducted out of their astral body. And, you know, the wife or husband sitting next to them wouldn't even know it. And they wouldn't even know it either because the astral body is actually a replica of our physical body. And at first, you know, you wouldn't even know that you're in some different state of being. And this may even extend out into some of the more modern accounts of people having crazy experiences with like secret space programs and extraterrestrial worlds and bases and all of that. I think a lot of it is happening on that side.
Do you feel when you're over there, and I know you said you feel very protected, but do you ever feel like you're in danger if you don't get back quick enough, if you're out there too long, you might enter that realm of kind of lost souls?
No, I think lost souls happen, in my opinion, in my kind of rough experience, it happens as a result of like psychological issues. You know, people who are basically psychologically damaged, and normally we're supposed to heal if we go to that side, whether it's the light or whether it's people who are assigned to us to help us heal and help us get over our problems and become emotionally healthy and have that kind of unity consciousness that we're kind of supposed to have. But if somebody is psychologically damaged, then they may choose to reject all that help. And if they choose to reject that help, then, I mean, we kind of see it on this side with certain people, maybe in like the homeless community, who almost it's like they're in their own mind, they're in their own world, and they don't listen to anybody else, and they don't really accept it when other people try to help them. And so we see the same phenomenon on astral levels or the near-Earth astral, which is like when that side is coexisted with our side. And there are souls who may just be rejecting help, and they're just kind of stuck in their own way of thinking, their way of being. And those are kind of what we call lost souls. So if I don't have any predisposition toward any kind of psychological issues, then that's not going to happen to me. And as for feeling like I'm going to be stuck there, it's the opposite. So the issue is that when I have an experience, I don't know how long I'm going to be able to keep the experience going because I'm always being pulled back into my consciousness here, or I'm always being pulled back into having to wake up. And that's quite frustrating. And so I wish I could prolong an experience longer and have more control over it. So it's definitely the opposite of that. I feel like I'm not in complete control, and I would like to stay longer in most situations.
Many people report issues of sleep paralysis and a sense that there's some foreboding, something approaching them, and they're unable to fully move or realize what it is. They don't often see it, but they can sense it. And as somebody who's proficient at out-of-body exploration, I'm just curious, is there any chance that what they're sensing is their own soul trying to re-enter and coming back? So there's that connection to the physical form, which is in its sense kind of conscious and awake, the soul form, which is trying to re-enter the body, which would give you that kind of uncomfortable sense, I would guess.
I don't know if I agree with that because...
Well, it's my show, you have to.
Fair enough. But because the thing is that, I mean, your soul, if you will, your consciousness, is going to be localized to your locus of awareness. I don't think that there would be like a split between like your physical brain self identifying with the astral self because, well, the physical brain self is kind of an illusion. So we're already operating on astral physics. We're just being filtered through the brain, basically. So there's not really like a split there. I think that, okay, so with sleep paralysis and people having those kind of negative experiences, sleep paralysis is just your body is immobilized because of a chemical that's produced that keeps your body immobilized when you are asleep. But basically, when you're about to go out of body, you're going to have sleep paralysis because your body is shut down, it's unconscious, and so it's going to be paralyzed. But for me, it's never an issue because I can immediately gain motor control of my astral limbs. And so I'll see like arm number 2 coming up out of arm number 1, and I can move it around and make a fist, and I don't feel paralyzed at all because I have full control of my other body. Now, some people have the negative experiences, and that gets into a really weird area that we may even talk about like as the netherworld or Hades, which is like this in-between point between like the astral side and the earth side. Well, I may call it like the near-earth astral. And this in-between area, it's almost like influenced by dream consciousness. It's influenced by our subconscious. So you can manifest things out of your mind. If you have a fear of, like, let's say you have a fear of clowns, and somewhere in the back of your head, is that fear that's lingering, and then you go into that near-earth astral, there's a real chance you may hallucinate a big evil clown staring at you, and it's going to feel physically very real. Because that kind of netherworld state, it's like it manifests all this stuff out of our subconscious minds. And so that's why some people, they only get stuck in that level. They never go past it, and they end up having all these weird negative experiences. And so really it's because they haven't moved beyond that level. And if they were to do that, then they'd have much better experiences. So it's kind of about education. Like, people need to learn how to go extend themselves beyond that kind of netherworld in-between realm and go have real experiences in the real astral plane and kind of get out of all that mess.
The angelic realm, the demonic realm. I want to know more about that when we return. But first, it's time to open the doors to the Darchives. We've got a story for you right now, a double dose of wow from Rosanna Giuliano in this week's Theater of the Mind.
My name is Rosanna Giuliano, and I believe in angels and the healing power of faith. When I gave birth to my twin boys, it was a complicated pregnancy and also an extremely complicated birth. I was sent home from the hospital 2 days after giving birth to my twin boys. When I got home, I had had a C-section and all that comes with giving birth to twins. I was tired, I was exhausted, I was nursing, and my family and my husband at the time wanted me to go get some rest, that they would take care of the boys. So they said, go in the bedroom, go lay down, you get some rest, we'll take care of this for now. And so I was very happy to oblige to that. I went in, went to sleep, and the next thing I heard was the sound of chaos around me. The sound of wheels of a stretcher rolling along the concrete out in front of my house, and I knew it was me on the stretcher. I heard people talking about me. I heard the ambulance. I heard the diesel engine of the ambulance. I knew what was happening. I just didn't know what or where, and then I went. The next thing I remember is that I'm in the emergency room, and there are emergency personnel running all around me. I know that they're trying to figure out what's wrong with me. Nobody can figure that out. I still don't know what's going on or why I'm there. I find out later that my husband had walked into the bedroom and I was blue. Nobody knows how long. I went without oxygen. They believe I had a seizure. I had some complications with maybe some medication. I had problems with my epidural when the anesthesiologist administered it initially before I gave birth, and the anesthesiologist had tapped into my spinal fluid, which had created a hole for my spinal fluid to escape out of my spine and the spinal fluid around my head, around my brain. And so there was a lot of complications along with that. And so what they had decided in the emergency room was they needed to stop the spinal fluid leaking into my body and out of my spine and around my brain, thinking that is what was causing my problems. So the anesthesiologist was getting ready to stick the long needle back into my spine. And at that moment, they had pulled me up. I don't remember this part exactly. I'm told that this is what happened. They pulled me up into a seated position that you need to be in whenever you're getting ready to get your epidural for the needle to go into your spine. They had my husband stand in front of me and had me lean onto my husband in the seated position so that my back was arched a bit and bent over to make my spine more accessible. At that moment, I saw something beautiful, amazing, awesome. And whatever the look on my face was, whatever wonderment, whatever expression I had on my face, whatever I did, stopped every single person dead in their tracks in the emergency room. Everybody in my vicinity, all people who were working with me, around me, everybody stopped and looked at me. The anesthesiologist held the needle, did not put it in my spine, stopped at the moment that she was going to put the needle into my spine. And whatever I saw, which I believed to be my guardian angel, I stared up and to my right, up towards the ceiling. And all I could say, there was no description that could describe the look on my face, but the words that came out of my mouth at the time were, "How pretty." And that's all. I know that I just couldn't even describe it, that I felt that it was just the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, ever. And I believe that was my guardian angel getting my attention to get the emergency room's attention, because right after I said, "How pretty," I had a seizure. And if that needle had been in my spine, I would have been definitely paralyzed. There's no telling what other damage would have been done. But I do believe that my guardian angel came at that moment, in my moment of need, to prevent a future tragic thing that could happen to me, to save my life the way as it was. I spent 2 days in a coma following that. And when I came out of the coma, I was told everything that happened. A little bit after that, because of all the complications due to my pregnancy and the delivery that I had, which was quite a bit, I ended up having a condition called tachycardia and high blood pressure. And they may go hand in hand, I'm not sure, but tachycardia is a condition where your heart races constantly, so fast. And it was, the beat also was off, so I constantly had a heart that was racing, blood pressure that was high. My heart was skipping beats all the time. I would constantly feel like I had butterflies in my stomach constantly, which every now and then's okay, but all the time, not a fun thing to have. So I was on blood pressure medicine for a good 2 years after giving birth, and I needed that blood pressure medicine. The moment it would come close to my next dosage, actually almost about an hour and a half to an hour prior to time for me to take my next dosage of medication, all my symptoms would show up, and I wouldn't even have to look at a clock, because my ears would start ringing, my breath, I would have a hard time breathing, my eyes, my vision would get blurry, I would get a splotchy chest and then the butterflies would come in my stomach, and I mean, it was a pretty severe tachycardia that I had, a severe heart problem that I had, that I must take medication for, and I had to stay on medication. Well, one morning I was getting ready for work, and as I was getting ready for work, I always listened to talk radio of some sort, just whatever's on the radio. I would go through the dials, and I would look and just listen to different things, and whatever topic of the morning that I felt I was interested in, I would just land on it, and I would go with that and have that on in the background as I was getting ready, because I just like to have things on in the background as I get ready. And that particular morning, I landed on a religious program. I, to this day, do not know what program it was. I know it was a man and a woman, and they were talking about Jesus and whatever religious topic they were talking about at the time, and some whatever Bible verse that they were talking about. And so I'm listening to it. It's interesting. I'm interested in it. And then they say, okay, now we're going to do the healing part of our program. And today we're going to focus on healing those who have heart problems. And I was like, oh, okay, interesting. I wonder what they do. Wonder how this works. So my interest peaked a little bit. So I listened a little more intently, a little more closely. And they said, okay, if you have a heart problem, what we're going to do is we're going to pray for you. But what we want you to do is we want you to put your hand on the device of however you're listening to us through. If it's a television, if it's a radio, just come over and put your hand on the device that you're listening through to hear our voice. And at the time, I was in my bedroom, so I walked over to my nightstand, put my hand on my clock radio, which is what I was listening through. And I was like, okay, well, why not? I have a heart condition. But this whole time I'm thinking, I'm not worthy of this. There's no way I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. This isn't going to happen. But I really, really wanted it to happen because it was such a hard part of my life to deal with this heart condition and these 3 little children that I was raising. And so I put my hand on the radio and they start to pray. And I am praying very hard. I'm receiving their prayers. And all along I'm receiving their prayers. In the same time, I'm thinking to myself, I'm having to fight off my doubts that I'm not worthy. I'm like, I'd pray, I'd receive their prayer, and then the little doubt would come and go, no, this isn't going to work. You're not worthy. You're not worthy. And I'd push it away. And I'm like, focus. Let's receive this prayer. Let's receive this prayer. And so that I was struggling with that the entire time of them praying for me and my heart condition and my doubts and of all kinds of things. But I do believe that Jesus can heal. And I knew that more than anything. And I hung on to that and I focused on that and the fact that I know Jesus can heal, and I hoped it was my time. Got my hand on the radio, receiving their prayer, praying very, very hard. And the next thing they say is, okay, now you're going to feel heat in your heart. You're going to feel hot. You're going to feel heat. And at that very moment, my chest, where my heart is, my heart got hot. And I mean hot. It started small and it started radiating out. And it was pretty quick because the moment I started feeling that heat in my heart, it scared me. And I jerked my hand off the radio and it stopped. And I was like, oh no. I ruined it. What did I do? I ruined this. I ruined it. What did I do? And so I had already taken my heart medication that morning. I went on to throughout the day. And when it came time to take my next heart medication, none of my symptoms came up. But I was like, no, there's no way. This just isn't possible. There's no way. And so I waited about an hour, waiting for my never-ending myriad of heart condition things to hit me, and they never did. But I didn't feel like I was healed because no way, I'm not worthy of that. And I jerked my hand away too quick. I didn't get healed. So I went on and took my heart medication. Well, pretty quick. When you take blood pressure medicine and you don't need it, your blood pressure drops. And I got so weak. I was very lethargic. I couldn't believe what was happening to me. I was with some people at the time, and I was like, I'm going to need a coffee. Let's give me some coffee. I didn't tell them what happened because I just couldn't talk about it. And from that point forward, I never took my heart medication again, ever. My heart medication that I could not go without, that I could not live without, that I had to take within an hour and a half of the dosage time. And I went back to the hospital, went back to the doctor about 6 months later, told him that I had taken myself off my heart medication, that I didn't need it anymore, didn't tell him that I received a faith healing. And they checked me out and everything was fine, and they told me I didn't need my heart medication anymore. And so I now believe in the healing power of faith, even though my faith at the time, I was very active in my church. My faith in God is strong, was then, is now. My faith in the healing power of Jesus is strong, but my faith in myself was not. And I still to this day don't understand why I was chosen to be healed, how I received a healing. And I know there are people out there who are far more devoted, who are better people, who I feel deserve to be healed, and I don't understand, and I don't know why they didn't receive their healing and I did. But I do know that I live my life with a purpose, and in those moments when I'm depressed or when I'm sad or when I don't understand why the way things are or the way the world is, and I just have to remember that I'm saved and I'm here, and I may not know my purpose, but God knows my purpose, and He's going to keep me here as long as He needs me here. And I don't want to let Him down, and I'm not going to disappoint Him, and I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to look for signs, and I'm going to try and follow His will. And I'm very fortunate, I know that. But that's my story. I believe in angels, and I believe in the healing power of faith.
Beyond the darkness.
Hello, welcome back. This is the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Afterlifetopics.com. That's the site you can go visit to learn more about our guest as we talk about the afterlife and beyond, traveling into the death realm. This is fascinating to me to talk to somebody who's spent so much time trying to do this and explore that area. Cyrus Kirkpatrick, our guest. Again, thank you for being here, Cyrus.
Hi, great.
Now, I wanted to talk with you. I mentioned before the break the angelic realm, the demonic realm. Is that something that you come into encounters with when you travel in these areas? And if so, are there ways to avoid stopping over in any of those realms, Hades, Limbo, whatever it was you were referring to earlier?
Well, so when it comes to like what I kind of call Hades or a netherworld type state, this is a near-Earth astral that seems to be very connected to our subconscious minds. And this is sort of the place you go when, I guess the best example would be the movie Ghost with Patrick Swayze. So in Ghost, he's interacting with people, but nobody can see him. And the only way that the ghost may have been inaccurate is I think if you're really on that side where you are connected to our world, but you're still on that spectrum, you're going to encounter a lot more, shall we say, like strange entities and creatures and manifestations of your subconscious, because all that seems to manifest on that level. And I think the best thing to do is to avoid that level if you can, because it's not really a great place to hang around. Now, when it comes to angelic realms or demonic realms, you know, there's so much out there that I don't really rule anything out. I know that there's negative astral planes that religions have interpreted as being hellish environments over, thousands of years. And I wouldn't refer to them as hell. I would refer to them as states of consciousness that are lesser developed, or that they are manifesting negativity or hatred and things like that. And those eventually coalesce and create entire planes of existence. And again, these are not places I think anybody would want to venture into without the assistance of like a powerful guide. And angelic realms is a little bit of a broad topic, because maybe we mean like heavenly higher realms, or maybe we mean elements of our earthly religions that possibly manifest in a literal way. But either way, I haven't been able to quite experience realms that high. And I do think if you do experience a very heavenly realm, then I guess one can consider themselves a bit lucky, because it that's a great opportunity, a great experience that you can have where you can connect to something that's so pristine or so high like that. Does that make sense?
It does. I know our Theater of the Mind this week, we heard from Rosanna, who believes she encountered, like her husband did the week before, angelic intervention and saw something, but didn't seem to be visual in our spectrum to the people around them in some of these cases. So I often wondered where they may lie, and is that something that in that near-death or that out-of-body experience you'd be more apt to see or run into?
Well, I think what happens is that we interpret entities or people, individuals from that side as being angelic because we're looking at that through the prism of our religious expectations.
All right, fair enough.
Whereas, let's say we have what some people call divine intervention. So let's say an individual or a council or a group of people from that side decide, hey, we're going to intervene to prevent X, Y, Z from happening to somebody on this side. Then they may very well just be a group of like guides, facilitators, teachers, whatever you want to call it, from that side, and they're helping out over here. And then we might interpret them as being angels. Whereas if I had such experience, I wouldn't see them necessarily as, quote, angels. I would see them as higher level, sophisticated guides, teachers, planners, whatever you want to call it, who are coming down to our level to help us with something. And if it gives people comfort to interpret them as angels, that's okay. And I also know that people on that side may even take on I don't want to say disguise, but they may take on the costume or the representation or the archetype of an angel because it'll help fit somebody's expectation and help make it into a positive experience for them. And, again, it's quite limitless. So I also think that people who are in love with the idea of the angelic form with wings and a harp or whatever that might be can very easily take on that archetype on that side and then grow a pair of wings and live in a cloud. Whatever it is you really want to do, you can do it. So in a way, it's almost like a concept that comes out of the imagination may connect with reality, and then that concept is no longer such an illusion, but it becomes a real thing. As for angels truly existing, we can go deep into the theological literature about that, and there is possibility, I think, from what I've studied, that a non-human entity that assumes a human form and is very, very ancient, I think that we would refer to these as angels. And with some of the literature I've studied, I do think that there's both light angels and dark angels that sort of guard the different elemental concepts of the universe, and they may have a human type of form. So these may be like the real angels that some people describe, but I think that's a lot different than like these biblical concepts. I think that reality may not have as much in common with the kind of pop spirituality or pop religious ideas that our Western culture is accustomed to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally understand where you're going with that. Now, can you tell me, when you're in that realm, are you attractive, and I don't mean in the sexual aspect, but I mean, are you attractive to lower level entities and souls that may be lost, confused, whatever? Is there any chance of returning with a traveler, returning with somebody connected to you?
But do you mean like returning
possession,
with
I guess, is
possession?
Right.
Well, I try not to sugarcoat the topic because I know there's a lot of weird stuff that's happened to people. And so I'm not one of those people who say, out-of-body travel is completely safe, it's harmless, blah, blah, blah. Because I don't really believe that. Obviously, all the ideas, you can't get back into your body, you're stuck there, the silver cord breaks or whatever. I don't buy any of that stuff. But there can be negative experiences. Like, let's take, for example, my story earlier with the succubus. Let's say that I wasn't doing this professionally. Let's say that I was just some weak-willed dude who maybe hasn't talked to a beautiful girl in a long time. And then I see this girl on that side and I think, oh, wow, you're so beautiful, I want to talk to you. And then I just get completely roped in by this entity who feeds off of sexual energy and takes men as slaves. So what could that entity possibly do to that person back on this side? Maybe they'll begin experiencing continual intrusive dreams. Maybe they will experience some type of possession. Maybe JC there, that succubus girl, maybe she will do all types of things to somebody from her side, feeding off of them from here. So that, could be a very real threat if somebody is foolish enough to allow an entity like that to enter into his life. So if you come at this from a perspective of ignorance, it's dangerous. Mm-hmm. I think that anybody who does this, they need to be in a very positive state of mind. So if you have a lot of unfinished business, a lot of problems, a lot of stress, you feel guilty, maybe you're in the middle of a divorce, or, if the loved one just died, you're in a dark place, you hate your job. These are good reasons to maybe not explore that side and not perform out-of-body travels. But if you feel you're in a good place, you feel happy, you feel confident, you're curious, you have a good connection to maybe like deceased loved ones on that side, you want to connect with them, which is the main thing I do, by the way, then I think that going out of body is a very, very good idea. So it depends a lot on mental states. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And I'm not trying to, I understand when I question these things, it's not trying to belittle the work and the aspects that you're doing. But I know that this is a lot of what fear people bring to these points. And this is why, I try to tell people, if you're going into things with fear, you're probably setting yourself up for a form of failure. And it's best not to enter into those exercises. Start to gain some confidence in you and set the intention. I mean, intention has to be a big part of this for you, isn't it? Knowing where you're going to go, how you want to get where you're going to go, and not just floundering around.
Intention, conscious and subconscious intention tends to direct our experiences. So, if I have an intention to have a specific type of experience, I think it's more likely to manifest. Like I mentioned before, a primary motivator tends to be a desire to communicate to a deceased loved one. So like I have a mother on that side, I have a brother, and more recently a father who've all passed away. And so going out of body is typically a way of, say, connecting, especially like to my mother. And so a lot of times I don't care too much about having some of those more fantastical experiences. I just want to have a conversation like with a deceased loved one. And I'm able to do that probably the most. But also at the same time, I sometimes desire to go back into that world, talk to people, have explorations, especially so I have content to write about, And so if I have that intention, I think I'm more likely to have that type of experience. So definitely have an idea in your mind. Don't just do it thoughtlessly, because if you are thoughtless, it's more likely something might be able to influence that intention toward whatever it is that they want you to do.
We've got a lot to cover in a little bit of time left together here, so I want to kind of turn it over to you and talk to me. First of all, if you could share some of your favorite experiences and stories that you've collected for your books, I'd love to hear a few of those examples. And then, kind of going into the realm of what you think people should know most about this, and what do you think are the lessons that are most important?
So when it comes to experiences, let me just attempt to break that down like one element at a time. So experiences. So let me think. I've had quite a few experiences. I pepper them throughout my 2 books, and let me think. So one that comes to mind a lot, and that an experience that I really like, because I'm kind of an evidence-based person, and I want objective evidence to come out of my experiences. And I had one experience where basically I met this guy who was working behind a bar in the Astral, and the bar was quite interesting because it was a bar for MMA enthusiasts, so people who love MMA sports. And basically, you can go on stage and beat the junk out of each other, and nobody's going to have any long-term injuries because it's your astral body, so it doesn't operate on the same type of entropy that we have to deal with. So people can beat each other up, box, or do MMA, and you don't have long-term consequences. So anyway, so I'm in this bar and I'm talking to this guy. He's a really nice young man. And I decided to interview him, learn about his life a bit, and ask if he was aware of himself before he died. And he was, and he told me about, where he was from and that he had passed away recently. And I asked for his full name. So he gives me his full name. And I said, okay, well, maybe I'll give you a Google when I come out of this. And he was very surprised to hear that. And so I bid him farewell, and then I returned back to this level of existence. I pulled up my computer and I typed his name in Facebook, and sure enough, what came up was a memorial page, and there was his name and there was his face. And so that's a very distinctive experience for me, because I went from being in that state, talking to somebody, coming out of it, and then confirming that it was all real. So that's one of my more memorable experiences. I've had, obviously quite a few others. I've been in what I would best describe as astral tourist locations. And so I've been in Astral London, and Astral London is filled with Harry Potter stuff. So you have like magic schools, you have recreations of Hogwarts, you have basically people reliving the whole Harry Potter fandom. And I'm not a big Harry Potter guy, but I thought it was funny that people are doing this. And so I have distinctive memories of attending a kind of Harry Potter magic school in London, where you pick up a wand and then you say, like in Harry Potter, they have like those magic words like Expelliarmus or whatever it is, right? You wave the wand and then it creates the spell. So there was somebody actually teaching people to do that. And I recall being at that school, and then, I was, fully lucid. And that was memorable as well. I mean, it's funny. You wouldn't think that there's so much pop culture on that side, but really there is. So those are a couple of experiences off the top of my head.
Just tell me there's a chance I'll get to be on the Starship Enterprise and you can sign me up. How do I get over there? Pop culture references and all. I need to be there.
Yeah, no, I think no problem. You can pretty much guarantee that there's going to be Trekkies, but I would say, go look for the real thing, because most likely there's legitimate spaceships that, you can hang out with all the ETs or the mantids or, whomever you fancy. I can guarantee there's probably stuff like that. And so the second part of your question was kind of like what are the main lessons, or like what are the? Well,
you've put a lot of time into this, right? I mean, you put a lot of time into this. You've got 3 books out. The new book is due out this week, and a lot of focus, a lot of time and intention in traveling this. What are the lessons you want people to really get from the amount of work that you're doing and the stories you've collected?
Well, I'll tell you what. What I do, the books. Especially Awakened by Death, which is a co-authorship with Karen Swain, and she's a podcast host. And that book especially, but also my 2 primary books, a big theme, a big idea in my mind is to help people with grief. Okay, so that's basically why I got into this, because I see people having so much grief about deceased loved ones who have passed on, and there is still so much skepticism and uncertainty about our multi-dimensional existence, that really it's my mission, my desire to explore these topics, to explore the afterlife in as much detail as possible, and especially get rid of misconceptions. And that's something that I talk about mainly. I'm speaking about that topic at the 2018 Afterlife Symposium in Phoenix in just a couple of weeks, because people have all these fearful ideas about what happens when you die. It ranges from the idea, of course, of religious ideas of being stuck in hell, a lake of fire forever, to kind of like the New Age movement, which I think sometimes gets things really badly wrong. Like, I'll hear people say, oh, in the afterlife, we are relegated to just being orbs of light that float around, and you can't eat food, you can't drink things, you can't have sex, you can't, do any of the physical things. And of course, this is completely wrong, because the astral is still a physical or semi-physical universe. So I hear these ideas. I hear people having grief that's only exacerbated by these ideas. And really what I want to do is help alleviate people of that pain and show them, the other side. It begins at a point that's very similar to this side. So if you have a deceased loved one, if you have a deceased spouse or a child or a parent, once you're crossed over also, or maybe even now if you become very good at out-of-body experiences, you can be back with them leading a life very similar to the life that you had previously. So couples that have houses and they have, they have a dog, they have a garden, they have hobbies. And I mean, it's just like life continues on. And that's the big point. That's what humanity needs to learn about. And that's why I do what I do. So the stories are fun, like the succubus and all that kind of stuff. What it comes down to is reconnecting with people we love and care about. And that's what I do. That's what I care about.
If people want to start exploring these realms, personally, I'd love that opportunity to have a conversation with my grandmother, my grandfather, my grandparents, just, getting back into that realm. First off, how do you, as a rational person, convince yourself that you're having an actual conversation with them as opposed to dealing with the grieving process and having a very deeply imaginative experience? Because the brain and sleep self, they have a hard time regulating, understanding which is which. What is it about it and the experience itself that makes you come to terms that they are two totally different experiences and that you are truly involved in this conversation with them and not just playing out a manifestation of your wishes?
That skepticism is warranted because this also happens. Lucid dreams happen and they're not astral projection experiences. Lucid dreams are manifestations of your subconscious, of your higher self, and it can involve basically deceased loved ones or anything you can think of. But I always can tell a lucid dream because when I am lucid in a dream, I realize I'm the one creating everything around me. So if I'm talking to somebody, their thoughts are really my thoughts. And once I become aware of that, I realize I'm the one, it's like a sock puppet. Like somebody I'm talking to is just a manifestation that I'm speaking through them and creating this illusion. So to me, it's very apparent if I'm just having a lucid dream because, again, it's a world of sock puppets, and it's very much an illusion. If I'm having a real astral experience with a real person, well, when you talk to somebody, it's like you feel who they are, that they're an autonomous person. So me talking to you right now, I can feel that you are an autonomous individual with your own thoughts that are separate from mine. And you could tell me something that I wouldn't know. Like maybe you know some words in Spanish or something, or maybe you can speak Italian, and then you can tell me those ideas. You can tell me those words, and then I'll have learned something because that was not part of who I am. It wasn't part of my mind. So when you're having a real experience with somebody, it's much the same way as having a real experience with somebody here. It's the same way that I can know that somebody I'm talking to is here. It's not just part of my mind. And we have to be vigilant about that because I do think dreams help us. They have a purpose sometimes, but they can also fool us. And another thing is that sometimes if a loved one is trying to get through to you, then they will attempt to make contact with you from their side to here, just as you're coming to them. It's like with my mother, like that was the case. Like she'd come down and like materialize into my bedroom, and I could see her if I was even partially out of body. And then I could, physically talk to her. And, when this happens, like there's no doubt because it's a literal experience that's really happening to you, like in your bedroom. And that removes all fear of it being like a lucid dream or some kind of hallucination or something like that. But I think people do have to be vigilant and learn how to distinguish the two. And if necessary, if speaking to somebody and you're not sure if it's a dream or if it's somebody really on that side, get specific details, like I did with the guy I spoke to, and I was able to find his info like on Facebook. And then that can confirm beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was a real person.
I'd like to get some insight, if you wouldn't mind, walking us through the basics of what it takes to start this type of travel, how we can start to incorporate that, and we could open up to have these dialogues with loved ones, astral masters, whoever's out there that we're seeking counsel with. So if you're open to doing that, I'd love some insight on that. Okay, welcome back to the show, and we are having a very fascinating conversation with our guest, Cyrus Kirkpatrick, talking about traveling to the corridor of death and beyond. When you are setting forth to start these out-of-body experiences in astral projection, how long does it take you to mount up to get to the point where you're able to do it as proficiently as you are?
I think I began sort of setting the intent to begin doing it maybe January 2014. And by the summer of 2014, I was having some really crazy experiences. But the funny thing is that, at first I was just playing around with the initial stages. So you may feel like an electrical tingle. You may feel a buzzing sensation. You may feel different types of whirring sensations. Some people liken it to a helicopter, like the blades whirring in a circle. And you'll feel that energetic sensation, and then you'll learn slowly to pull yourself out of your body. You might find that you're able to look around the room, except your physical eyes are closed, so it's a little bit strange when your eyes are closed, but you can look around the room and see everything, right? So that means you're having an early astral experience because you've now basically switched to your astral consciousness. And I think many people have had these experiences and they don't even know it.
Yeah, thank you. You just gave me an answer to something we discussed. I'm going to be on an episode of a TV show called Haunted Hospitals later this year. And I had an experience a number of years ago when I was in for surgery. And yes, I admit I was on some painkillers and riding that kind of weird wave, but I would have the weirdest experience, Cyrus. I've never had it since. I've been in for other issues, but I would be looking in my room. I could see people visiting. I would close my eyes. They would all be gone. The room would look identical while my eyes were closed, and I could see a whole other group of sullen-faced figures standing in the corner of my room. Some of them were trying to communicate, yes. And I couldn't wrap my head around. I remember thinking, how am I seeing two different versions of the room? One with my eyes open, one with it closed, because it was weird. It was like my eyes would literally close. I'd see black for a second, and then the room was right back in front of me. Every detail except for the living people.
Yes, that's classic. Basically, you have your brain consciousness, and then you have your astral consciousness, and you're just switching between the two of them. And so that's something people can learn to do, or that's actually one of the initial out-of-body type experience that people have, is just switching between those two methods of sight. And really, besides the fact that you'll see things on that side that you cannot see on this side, you can't really notice a difference, So I think a lot of people have that experience without even realizing it. People have experiences where they say, yeah, the weirdest thing happened, I woke up, but then I woke up a second time. Now, do you ever hear people talk about that? Like, they're in the bed, they open their eyes, they look around, and then they start to lift up, to turn off the alarm clock or whatever. But then suddenly they, in a split second, they're back doing the same motion a second time. And that leaves people very confused, and nobody knows why or how that happens. Well, what happens is that you've accidentally switched to the astral perspective, and you are basically getting up out of your body, thinking that you're in your normal body, doing those motions, and then you snap back to your physical body, and then you do it all over again. So that's like an initial stage, right? So if someone can begin doing that kind of whenever they want, or it begins happening more and more, it really means that they're being primed to be able to begin having more profound experiences, right? So I was doing that for a while and tripping out on it and really enjoying myself, by the way, because, I'm kind of doing experiments. I'm lifting my astral arm out of my physical arm and okay, do I have sensation? Do I have pain? If I hit the wall, will I feel it? I'm doing experiments like that. Up until finally I have an experience where I'm basically pulled out of my astral body. And this was facilitated by some other power, I think, right? And I was taken directly to a place on that side. There was a temple. It was like a forest. And I met a couple of basically guides, some people would say angelic beings, but they were pretty normal and physical human looking, and they were East Indian, Hindu. And they kind of cued me in on what was happening. They gave me a primer on what astral projection is like, what I was doing, some basic tips and suggestions. They told me a little bit about their world, and we had a whole dialogue, and it was, of course, a very moving, very powerful experience to me. And then I was kind of sent back to my body, and that kicked off a lot more experiences. So it's almost like I had that experience happen to me. And after that, I was able to begin having astral experiences probably every few days. And that continued for, like I said, most of 2014 on into 2015, and it's kind of slowed down. And these days, I only have an experience, maybe every couple of weeks I'll have a good one. Maybe sometimes as little as once a month if I'm very busy and I'm working a lot. But back then, it was all the time. And it's almost like, I had to kind of prime myself first with those basic astral experiences, and then it's like it opened the floodgates. But to be able to do that, you really need to experiment with sleep states. So I recommend getting like a soft alarm, and maybe make the alarm like a recording if your phone has that capability of your own voice talking, and say something like my name is Cyrus, so I might say, Cyrus, become conscious now. And the idea is that when you're dreaming or when you're asleep, you're going to hear your own voice speaking to you softly, telling you to snap out of the dream state and become conscious of yourself while your body is asleep. Because once you're able to do that, you're able to poke out of your physical body or open your astral eyes, things like that. And the reason you had that experience when you're on pain meds is because the pain meds were kind of changing the dynamic of how your brain was interpreting consciousness. So that made you more susceptible to being able to look out of your astral body. And it sounds like you had some visitors who were aware of this happening and were trying to make contact with you at that kind of opportune moment. So that's kind of interesting as well.
Yeah, it was very, very strange, and I have very clean memory of it, even being in a drug-induced state. That's what really kind of, I don't want to say upset me, but made me most unbalanced about it was, I think if this was just a drugged thing, I shouldn't be remembering this as clearly as I am. And yet there it is. All right. So what are some of the other immediate tips for people that want to start to get into this? And do you walk them through it in your books? Do you give an understanding of step 1, step 2, step 3?
Yeah. In Understanding Life After Death, I have a section where I do give a step-by-step about out-of-body travel. So, like I said, that one technique was to set the soft alarm. I also recommend, for me, I don't know if this works for everybody, but it definitely works for me, is that if I take a nap, I'm much more inclined to begin having an astral experience compared to if I am sleeping after like a long day of working or whatever, when my body is very tired. So if I lay down at 1 p.m., if I have a day off or whatever, which sometimes I do because mostly I make my own schedule, so that's not as difficult, then I am much more likely to have an experience. I also recommend setting the intention. I recommend like meditation. I recommend lighting incense. I recommend really putting the idea out into your subconscious that you will begin having these experiences, because the thing that's blocking you is usually a subconscious type of fear. And so half the battle is psychological and giving yourself permission to begin having experiences like this. And I think that's the main thing that inhibits most people, as well as with like lucid dreaming. So I recommend the soft alarm. I recommend repeating something to yourself throughout the day, which will become so habitual that you will repeat it while you are having, for instance, a dream. Let's say that the phrase is, or the sentence is, "Am I dreaming right now?" So you keep repeating this to yourself all day. And then when you go to sleep at night and when you begin dreaming, you can ask yourself, am I dreaming right now? And then you will snap into awareness of the dream. And once you are aware that you're dreaming, you have the ability to then dismiss the dream, get rid of the dream, and become conscious of yourself while your body is sleeping. And then once you're doing that, you're able to begin having an out-of-body experience, because if your body is paralyzed, but you try to move, you'll find that it is your astral body that is able to move out of its physical body. So I definitely recommend that. That was a technique that helped me a lot. So again, to kind of rehash throughout the day, ask yourself, am I dreaming? Am I dreaming? Am I dreaming? Until it becomes a habit. And then once it's a habit and you begin asking that while you're really dreaming, it will snap your consciousness back into place, and you'll get out of that dream consciousness and back into lucid awareness. So that's definitely a technique that I suggest.
All right. Sounds great. Check out the books, everyone, and you can start to educate yourself on this as well. Understanding Life After Death, an exploration of what awaits you, me, and everyone we've ever known, the Afterlife Topics book. That's volume 1, came out back in September of 2015. The brand new book is due out this week, The Afterlife and Beyond, an examination of life and death, or life after death, by an out-of-body explorer. And his other book, Awakened by Death, Stories of Transformation. So those books are all out and available. You can find them at Amazon.com. We've also got a link up to his website where he's got links and more information about that. Cyrus, has there been a change for you over the years of doing this? Has your concepts and perceptions of what you were doing and how you're doing it changed? Have you begun to understand more of the mechanics of it, or was it already pretty open to you when you first started this?
I think there has been a change, and I think that change is the sense that when I only knew about these topics by doing research and studying, let's say, historical mediumship accounts or historical channeling accounts. Like I always liked a book called Life in the World Unseen, which was by this guy named Anthony Bourgeat. He was a channeler from the 1900s. But anyway, when I only had that perspective, I wasn't able to wrap my mind fully around the concept. And I really couldn't imagine that the other side is a real and physical place. Like I had this kind of mental block. Like I didn't think that I could be sitting on that side and sipping a cup of tea and sitting on a chair, and it could be a real environment. I always had the idea, well, maybe it's kind of like this dreamscape. Maybe it's not a real place. And almost like when I think back to it, it was like a paranoia. But when I began having the real experiences, I began to see that, this is an actual other side of existence, and it's the same as the existence we're in right now, and it's a tangible place. It's not a dreamscape. It's not this abstraction. It's a real place you can go to. And so now that I'm able to see the other side as a literal existence, then it changes a lot about the way you see this life. And I think it improves my quality of life substantially because I have a lot less fear about things. I'm not afraid of death. I kind of see existence itself as something that we can enjoy and explore. And, this is a unique opportunity to explore this world. And I don't have any trepidation when the time comes to go explore that world as well. And when you have that kind of fear of death that's always lingering in most people's minds, when that's finally lifted, it's very apparent because a lot of people are not even aware that they have that fear that's been holding them back their whole life. And when you begin doing this, when you begin talking to deceased people and asking them poignant questions and things like that, you finally get past that and you're finally able to live a life without all that nagging sensation of what's going to happen when I die and, is there an afterlife? Is there heaven or hell? And all these existential thoughts. And so being able to live without worrying about that so much, I think makes a big difference.
It sounds like it. That's definitely something I've got to check into, as I would love to move past that fear of death and start to understand more about the future for us. Cyrus, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you all for tuning in. Remember to call our Voices from Beyond voicemail and leave us your paranormal encounters. 651-300-4977, 651-300-4977, so we can feature them in upcoming episodes of Beyond the Darkness. And join me again tomorrow as I begin a whole new week right here on Midnight in the Desert. More strange talk. You can find that 5 nights a week by visiting midnightinthedesert.com. You've been listening to the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness.